When Senator JD Vance questioned Arnold Schwarzenegger's right to speak for America on live television, he thought the audience would agree. Instead, Arnold didn't raise his voice. He just placed one hand on the table, and what he said next left the room frozen. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The camera was already live. Not the head-on A-cam, but the roaming one, the one that moved like a whisper between the shoulders of the front row, catching every flicker of discomfort. Bill Maher adjusted his cue cards, didn't look up. The chyron below read, Legacy, Loyalty, and the Limits of Citizenship. To his left, Senator JD Vance. American flag pin gleaming, suit collar tight, posture military. To his right, Arnold Schwarzenegger. No tie. Dark charcoal jacket. A single bronze button missing from his cuff, unrepaired. JD leaned forward first. Elbows on the tempered glass table. A practiced breath. My grandfather served in Normandy. My father was stationed in Okinawa. I did my part in Appalachia, helping veterans rebuild homes with bare budgets and no headlines. His voice was steady, the kind you use to announce a flag at half-mast. And I say that not for applause, but because lineage means something. It's not just who we vote for. It's who taught us what voting means. Camera 2 pushed in on Arnold. He didn't blink. Didn't nod. His right hand hovered on the chair armrest, fingers just curled. Not clenched. Just there. JD continued, slower now. He tilted his chin half an inch upward, as if speaking to a courtroom rather than an audience. I don't question Mr. Schwarzenegger's love for this country. He reached for the flag pin on his lapel. Touched it with 2 fingers. A pause. Then, I question if love alone should rewrite its founding code. There it was. A brief murmur. Front row guests, some veterans, some donors, shifted in their seats. One pair of hands clapped, unsure if others would follow. A few more joined. Tentative. The kind of applause that's as much permission as performance. The moderator didn't interfere. He knew the temperature was rising. He let it cook. JD looked down briefly, straightened the edge of his notepad, though there were no notes on it. Just one quote printed in bold, order precedes freedom. Cut to Arnold. He hadn't moved. Not a blink. Not a twitch. But his thumb had found the ridge in the wood under the armrest. Just enough to anchor the stillness. The camera caught it. Zoomed. Then cut wide again. Nobody spoke. Bill finally broke the breathless frame. Let's talk about identity. National, personal, earned, or assigned. JD exhaled softly, as if he'd just dismounted from something high and holy. We're not just talking about accents here. We're talking about architecture, constitutional, cultural, generational. And I think it's fair to ask, does a guest ever get to move the walls? The line was sharp, but the smile that followed was softer. Performed. It didn't reach the eyes. Arnold didn't smile. He just shifted his left knee forward an inch. A weight transfer. Not aggressive, but intentional. Then, for the first time, his voice, "May I respond?" JD looked to Bill. Bill gestured with a palm. Go on. Arnold adjusted the mic, not to speak, but to create sound. The soft click of the gooseneck arm. The audience leaned forward. He didn't speak. Not yet. He reached for his water glass. Lifted it. Didn't drink. Then he placed it down. 2 fingertips tapped the base of the glass. Once. Twice. Then silence again. JD shifted in his seat. Just slightly. One shoulder raised, as if a chill had entered through the floor. Bill checked the time cue, then nodded again, still no words. Arnold leaned into the mic calm. Even. But he said nothing. Instead, the camera lingered on his face. His brow, not furrowed, not flat. Just present. He hadn't answered. But he hadn't conceded. He was holding the room hostage, without saying a word. And the room knew it. Cut to black. Silence stayed. Only the flag pin shimmered. and the grip on the chair remained, still just soft enough not to break. The moderator's pen tapped once against his mug, as if signaling the next move. JD Vance had just made his appeal to bloodlines, flags, and constitutional architecture. It was the kind of speech crafted not for conversation, but for clips. The studio didn't breathe. Then, tap. A single knock on the glass desk. Not accidental. Arnold's right index finger. Followed, precisely 2 seconds later, by a second tap. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't irritation. It was tempo. He kept his eyes locked on JD, not confrontational, not sympathetic. Just fixed. Like a steel beam staring at drywall. "I've paid my dues here," he said, voice steady, clipped. JD blinked. Once. Not in uniforms. In factories. In taxis. In silence. He didn't raise his volume. He didn't smile. He didn't clarify. The MIC caught it all, the absence of hesitation, the presence of something earned. Camera 2 cut to Bill Mayer. The host tilted his head, just slightly. A knowing lean, as if something in the floor had shifted and only he could feel it. Then back to JD. He didn't speak. But his shoulders told the truth. The left one dipped, and the right one curled back, not slouched, just guarded. Arnold didn't push further. He didn't need to. His hands remained where they were, one flat on the table, the other resting gently on the base of his MIC, fingers open. His body language was open court testimony without a jury present. JD leaned forward as if to interject. But the moment had already passed him. Arnold's silence wasn't empty. It was occupied. Like a chair no one expected him to claim, now visibly claimed without effort. The audience didn't applaud. That would have been too soon. Too easy. Instead, someone in the second row, a man in a blue-collar jacket, sleeves rolled, wedding ring scratched, exhaled just loud enough for the boom MIC to catch. Mayer leaned in. "Would you say, then, that your silence has been strategic?" Arnold turned, calmly. "No," a pause. "It's been expensive." The moderator didn't smile. Neither did the room. JD adjusted the edge of his name card. Not because it was misaligned, but because his fingers had nothing else to do. The silence returned, not void, but heavy. This was not the silence of forgetfulness or deference. This was the kind that made producers nervous. The kind that editors can't cut around without looking complicit. JD cleared his throat. "I appreciate that. Mr. Schwarzenegger has had a long journey towards civic engagement." The camera cut tight. JD's lips curled slightly, almost a smile, but not one he owned. "Though I might argue that taxes and factories don't necessarily qualify one to revise the national narrative." Arnold didn't flinch. "No," he replied. Then leaned slightly into the MIC, not for emphasis, but for ownership. "But they qualify me to live inside it." This time, the audience did respond. A slow murmur, just enough to catch in the studio's rear microphones. Nothing explosive. Just the sound of a room beginning to unfreeze. The camera caught JD's reaction, half nod, half swallow. Bill didn't interrupt. He knew exactly what kind of moment this was, the kind that can't be retaken, can't be sweetened in post. Arnold stayed still. His voice had stopped, but he was still speaking. The producers signaled to shift topics. The red cue light blinked on. But no one moved. JD's next words, if any, would be defensive now. And everyone watching, both in studio and across the country, could feel it. Arnold hadn't won. Not yet. But for the first time, JD Vance wasn't speaking from the center of the stage. He was reacting. And in a room built on narrative control, reaction is concession. Cut to black. Silence still echoing. Tap. Tap. The rhythm of a country being redefined, without permission. "No offense," JD said, which, as always, meant offense was coming. Camera 1 held on his hands. Perfectly still until now. Then, he flipped to the second page of his briefing packet. Not for reference. For theater. According to Heritage Research, Over 50% of recent immigrants contribute less to GDP after a decade than legacy-born citizens. The paper rustled. Intentional. Like an oath before the verdict. That's not an attack. That's a ledger. He let it sit. Bill Maher didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence was perfectly measured. 11 seconds of live TV waiting to see if that number would ignite or deflate. JD didn't stop there. He turned, not to Arnold, but to the studio camera, ACAM, the national feed. Eyeline perfect. You can't sweat your way into sovereignty. The line hung in the air like a dropped flag. Camera 3 cut to the audience. Second row, a young man in a university sweatshirt nodded slowly. Maybe agreement. Maybe confusion disguised as approval. Third row, right side, a woman, grey blazer, pearl pin, late 50s, shook her head, once. Deliberate. No words. Just the motion of someone who'd heard that kind of line before. Arnold didn't move. Bill cleared his throat, softly. JD wasn't finished. We've mistaken hustle for heritage. Celebrity for statesmanship. And I get it, it makes great movies. But this country runs on law, not on legacy cameos. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. We don't need symbolic Americans. We need constitutional ones. The blow had landed. Not because of volume, but because it had structure, data, myth, dismissal, all disguised as fiscal responsibility. Arnold sat motionless. Not stoic. Not stiff. Just centered. The camera caught a small detail, his thumb now resting on the lip of his glass. A pressure point. Subtle. Contained. Bill finally turned. Arnold, care to respond? Arnold's eyes didn't leave JD. His hand left the glass, slowly. Then settled flat on the table. Palm open. But he said nothing. JD exhaled, slightly longer than necessary. The air in the room shifted. Not fully, but enough that no one reached for their coffee mugs. The audience didn't clap this time. Not yet. Because what JD had done wasn't a knockout. It was a reframing, an attempt to redefine the very rules of belonging. And in that silence, the audience wasn't sure whether they'd just heard a fact, or a line that would echo for the next decade. Arnold finally moved. Not forward. Not up. Just slightly to the side, his chair rotated 2 inches clockwise. Enough to shift his body, not his posture. He wasn't angling for camera. He was realigning the frame. Bill tried again. We can open this up, unless you have something you'd like to clarify. Arnold looked down, not in submission, but calculation. And then, nothing. No words. Just the gesture of picking up a pen, his own, not from the desk, and clicking it once. Then setting it down. That sound, the click, was louder than anything said in the last minute. Because JD's logic had reached the limit of its authority. He had statistics. But now the room was watching how Arnold absorbed it. Not what he would say, but what he wouldn't. The power wasn't in rebuttal. It was in refusing to dance. Back row, left side, an older man, jacket open, hands folded, nodded. Just once. In the booth, a producer motioned for camera 5 to zoom in slowly. JD straightened his papers again. Too quickly. Bill lifted a finger to pivot the segment. But before he could speak, the lights above shifted temperature, automated studio lighting recalibration. Still, it felt like the mood was agreeing. The duel wasn't over. But for the first time, JD had struck harder than he should have. And the room, split, silent, was beginning to choose who they'd rather stay silent with. No transition music. No host reset. Just the ambient buzz of air conditioning and MIC feedback, waiting to be noticed. Bill Maher leaned forward half an inch. Mr. Schwarzenegger. Arnold didn't look at him. He hadn't moved since the last blow. Then, he shifted. Slowly. Not grandly. Both hands came forward from under the desk. No flourish. No gesture of command. He placed them flat on the table, palms down, then slowly turned them over, palms up. Open. Empty. Unshielded. I didn't come here to be liked. He didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. I came here because silence already cost too much. Camera 2 stayed tight, not on his face, but on his hands. They were steady at first. Then, just slightly, the left hand twitched, almost imperceptibly. Not nervous. Just human. No one interrupted. JD's jaw flexed once. Arnold continued. The first thing I memorized in English wasn't a menu or a film line. It was the preamble. He paused. Not for a test. A beat. For dignity. It didn't land like applause bait. It wasn't meant to. The moment sat heavy. Like concrete on velvet. Bill leaned back, visibly. A recalibration in posture. JD didn't speak. But his right shoulder lowered slightly, less square. Less sure. Camera 4 moved in, catching the full table. Arnold's hand still open, JD's fingers tightening around his pen. When I first came here, Arnold added, I didn't have the words to argue with men like you. He turned, just enough to look at JD. The first direct eye contact since chapter 2. So I listened. And I worked. And I paid. Not in applause. Not in retweets. In silence. Bill let out a slow exhale into his mic, barely audible. The room stayed still. JD opened his mouth, but closed it again. Arnold didn't wait. I didn't sweat my way into sovereignty, he said, echoing JD's earlier line. I earned something smaller. Harder. Less fragile. His tone didn't rise. If anything, it softened. I earned a voice that doesn't need to shout. Audience cam, row 3, a man in Army Reserve uniform, head bowed, unreadable. Camera 1 held on Arnold's face now. Calm. Composed. Not defiant. Just finished. Bill finally leaned in. You saying love is enough. Arnold turned to him, gently. Not irritated. Not baited. No, a pause. I'm saying silence isn't. JD shifted, left knee bouncing once, fast. Camera 3 caught it. Then, Arnold's final movement. He reached for the pen he'd set down earlier in chapter 3. He didn't click it. He uncapped it. Pulled a folded paper from inside his jacket. Slid it forward, halfway across the table. Not to Bill. Not to JD. Just to the center. Then, placed the pen beside it. Capped. Horizontal. A line drawn with no ink. He didn't explain it. Didn't announce it. Didn't even look at it. He looked at the room. Then let his hands return to open posture. The studio was silent. Not dramatic silence. Mechanical silence. The kind where no one wants to be the first breath to break it. A voice in the control booth whispered, cut to wide. They didn't. They held the shot. Because for once, the absence of spin was more viral than any reaction. The pen still lay untouched in the center of the table. Bill Mayer adjusted his tie, not out of discomfort, but calculation. He looked at JD. Senator, your rebuttal. JD Vance straightened in his seat. A twitch at the corner of his mouth tried to pass for a smile. Well, he began, voice a touch too upbeat, we can debate dignity all night, but I think the American people are more interested in, just answer the question, Bill said, flat. Not curious. Not hostile. Just surgical. JD's mouth stayed open for a half second too long. Then he closed it, leaned back, and let out a single short breath, a silent laugh, meant for deflection. It didn't land. All right, he said, glancing toward the wings. The camera followed. No movement. No signal from the control booth. No aid. No stage manager stepping in. Just rows of cables, a dark monitor, and an empty shadow. JD turned back. Cleared his throat. We have a nation to run on facts, not feelings. We can't let emotional storytelling, he paused. Realized the wording. I mean, performance, override constitutional order. Camera 4 moved in. Not on his face, but on his hands, fidgeting with the edge of his notepad. The top corner was folded and refolded between 2 fingers. Across the desk, Arnold didn't blink, didn't lean in, just watched. Not like a predator, like a ledger. JD glanced again offstage. This time, his eyes lingered. Not strategic, searching. Still no one. Look, nobody here's questioning Mr. Schwarzenegger's work ethic. But we're talking about national identity, not individual success stories. He reached for his water. The glass tapped once against the coaster, too loud in the mic. His hand hovered as he sipped. When he set it down, the coaster stuck to the bottom, then dropped with a soft thump. Camera 2 stayed tight on his collar. Sweat, not a stream, not a bead. Just a half-inch darkening under the fold. Right side. Cut to Bill. One eyebrow raised, motionless. Senator Vance, he said, tone clipped, you invoked sovereignty. You cited economic data. You questioned moral authority. Now that someone has responded in kind, what's your counterpoint? JD smiled again, tighter. My counterpoint is this isn't a one-man audition for a citizenship pageant. A few low chuckles in the back row. But they didn't build. Arnold shifted, first movement in minutes. He turned, not toward JD, but toward the audience. Let the silence thicken. I didn't audition, he said quietly. I outlasted the credits. JD's jaw moved, but no words came. Camera 1 caught it, the telltale throat movement before a retreat phrase. Let me clarify, if I may, what I meant was. But he said none of them. Instead, he glanced down. Read the same sentence twice. Didn't turn the page. Bill Mayer folded his hands. Do you want to try again? JD Vance's response came a second late. The Constitution wasn't written with exceptions. Arnold finally looked at him. Neither was the preamble. JD blinked. The tension didn't burst. It caved. Audience shot, row 2, a woman in a navy blazer leaned forward, lips slightly parted. JD leaned back, not consciously. Then placed his hands flat on the desk. Not open like Arnold's. Not clenched. Just bracing. Camera 4 moved in for the final cut, the edge of JD's collar. Damp. The half-folded note. The paper clip snapped open, slightly bent. The kind of detail no one speaks of, but the internet remembers. The clip had aired. Twice. By the time the panelists shuffled papers and moved to the next segment, an inflation debate nobody would remember, the quote had already fractured the internet. Not because it was loud, but because it refused to be edited. On TikTok, the moment when Arnold whispered, "Silence already cost too much," was remixed into protest reels, layered over slow pans of immigration rallies and fourth-grade civics classrooms. No dramatic score. Just the ambient hum of real rooms. A Fox News contributor sneered on air, maybe next time he'll run for office in Vienna. The panel laughed. Briefly. But it didn't stick. Because at 4:19 p.m. the same day, in a modest public school in New Mexico, a 13-year-old boy named Mateo Jimenez opened his science notebook and quietly taped a printout over the inside cover. The quote wasn't centered. The font was too small. And his hands trembled while pressing the corners down. Nobody noticed. Not his teacher. Not the girl 2 seats over who always borrowed pencils. But Mateo left it there, then closed the notebook as if sealing something private. Back in the studio, the debate continued. JD Vance sat straighter now, arms locked, knuckles stiff against the table. His lapel mic had been adjusted during the break, but his collar still sagged slightly, betraying movement from before. Or maybe nerves. Arnold hadn't spoken again. He didn't need to. The producers cut to another clip, an unrelated hearing, while the internet splintered into its own judgment court. Reddit threads titled "The Immigrant Who Out-Americaned a Senator" trended for 7 hours. A muted camera feed from the audience risers caught an older woman holding her phone out. She wasn't filming. She was reading the caption. "The first thing I memorized in English was the preamble. Not for a test. For dignity." Her thumb paused. Then tapped save. CNN ran a lower third scroll during prime time that read, "Schwarzenegger silences room with civics, not sound." The moment had outgrown the broadcast. At 6:42 p.m., a civics teacher in Detroit laminated the quote and pinned it to the back wall. Below the state flag. Above the bookshelf with cracked spines and missing covers. A child in Boston used it as a caption under a sketch of a hand, not clenched, just open. The reaction didn't roar. It rustled. And somewhere between a Twitter reply thread and an old man in Montana writing a letter to the editor, the shape of the night began to shift. It wasn't the sound of applause. It was the feeling of posture, straightening. Back in the studio, JD checked his notes again. Bill Maher didn't look up. The segment was nearly over. But the silence still hadn't been broken. And in that pause, outside the room, off the air, a voice was beginning to form. It wasn't in English yet. But it was memorizing the words. The clock above the studio door read 10:57 p.m. Technicians were already coiling cords off camera. The moderator gave the usual wrap-up gestures. Flat palm, eye contact, half smile for the audience. Routine. But the panel hadn't moved. JD Vance stared down, jaw locked, right hand still on the base of his MIC stand. Not speaking. Not blinking. Just holding posture. Arnold adjusted his chair half an inch back. Not to relax, just to make room. Bill Maher cleared his throat. "Governor Schwarzenegger, before we end, anything you'd like to add?" A full 2 seconds passed. Then Arnold stood up. Not fast. Not slow. Just deliberate. Like the end of a page being turned without creases. He didn't touch the MIC. He didn't look at JD. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and unfolded a small piece of paper. The kind that looks like it had been in a wallet too long. Fold marks worn white. He placed it gently on the table between them. JD's eyes flinched, but didn't follow it. No words. No explanation. Arnold looked once, just once, at the camera light above lens A. Then he left his hand flat on the paper. Just for a breath. And walked off set. No music played. No exit line. No applause sign lit up. Only the faint sound of someone in the tech booth whispering, "We're still live." JD finally glanced down. A beat passed. He didn't pick it up. He didn't read it aloud. But the camera caught it, angled from stage right, zoomed gently in. The handwriting was uneven. Ink smudged slightly at the bottom. But the sentence was legible. Liberty isn't inherited. It's proven. One silence at a time. Bill Maher took a step forward. He looked at the paper. Then stopped. He didn't touch it either. Didn't need to. He turned to the moderator. "We done?" The moderator nodded. Cut. Lights dimmed. Cameras rolled back. The room fell into post-broadcast shuffle. But the paper stayed. No one packed it. No one removed it. And somewhere, in a public school in Wisconsin the next morning, a teacher projected the clip. Paused it at that frame. Asked her students not what they thought, but what they saw. A few blinked. One boy raised his hand. It looks like he knew it wouldn't be read, but left it anyway. The teacher nodded. Sometimes, lines aren't written to change the argument. They're left behind, so they can't be erased.